You think empathy makes you harmless. It does not. Because hidden beneath your kindness, your patience, and your emotional depth, there is a side of you most people never see, and perhaps a side you refuse to see yourself. You have spent years believing your sensitivity is proof of purity, that your soft heart makes you safe, that because you understand pain, you could never become dangerous. But your soul knows something your mind keeps avoiding. Empathy does not erase darkness. It only hides it more carefully. And this is where the uncomfortable truth begins. You are not simply a giver. You are not simply compassionate. You are a human nervous system carrying invisible storms, a heart that absorbs, a mind that remembers, a soul that grows tired. People often imagine the empath as endlessly gentle, the emotional healer, the peaceful listener, the one who forgives, the one who stays. But very few speak about what happens beneath that image. Very few speak about. You see the pressure building behind your silence, because silence has weight, and you have carried far too much of it. You notice what others ignore, the tension in voices, the dishonesty behind smiles, the emotional temperature of every room you enter. Your nervous system scans constantly, watching, adjusting, protecting. And over time, this gift becomes exhausting. You tell yourself you are simply understanding, simply patient, simply loving. But your body pays the price for every emotion your mouth refuses to name. You call it being strong. Your soul calls it survival. This is the truth you rarely admit. You have learned to hide your anger so well that even you forget it exists. You bury disappointment beneath understanding. You bury hurt beneath compassion. You bury resentment beneath loyalty. And eventually, you become a stranger to your own emotional reality. But buried emotions do not disappear. They wait, quietly, patiently, like shadows standing behind a locked door. And the longer you pretend you are untouched, the louder those shadows become. Because empathy has a dark side nobody prepared you for. Not evil, not cruelty. Something more complicated. Emotional overload. Silent resentment. Exhaustion disguised as love. And perhaps the darkest part of all, the secret belief that your pain matters less than everyone else's. Read that again inside yourself. Your pain matters less. How long have you lived by that invisible rule? How many times have you betrayed your own boundaries to protect someone else's comfort? How many nights has your mind replayed conversations your soul never fully healed from? You tell people you are fine, but your nervous system tells another story. And this is where you must be careful, because when empathy lives without boundaries, it begins to transform. The heart that heals can also harden. The soul that nurtures can also withdraw. And the person who survives through endless ional sacrifice may eventually stop recognizing themselves. So before you continue believing your empathy makes you harmless, ask yourself something difficult. What lives inside you that you have been too afraid to feel? Because the darkness of the empath is not born from hate. It is born from ignored pain. And ignored pain never stays silent forever. You were taught to fear your darkness. So you buried it. You smiled through betrayal. You stayed silent through disrespect. You called self-abandonment love. But your nervous system remembers every wound your mouth pretended never happened. Long before you understood what emotional survival meant, you learned something dangerous. You learned that certain emotions were unwelcome. Anger felt unsafe. Disappointment felt selfish. Boundaries felt risky. And pain became something to hide. So you became skilled at concealment. Not because deception lived in you, but because protection did. You learned how to smile while your heart carried tension. How to comfort others while quietly neglecting yourself. How to remain emotionally available even when your soul was exhausted. And perhaps people praised you for this. They called you patient, kind, strong, understanding. But strength can become a prison when it only means enduring what should have been questioned. Look closely at your own story. How many times did betrayal arrive disguised as misunderstanding? How many times did someone cross a line and you convinced yourself it was not serious enough to address? You felt the discomfort. Your body noticed. Your intuition whispered. But you silenced it, because confrontation threatened connection. And losing connection felt heavier than losing yourself. So you smiled through betrayal. Not because betrayal failed to hurt you, because you feared becoming difficult. You feared being misunderstood. You feared the quiet loneliness that sometimes follows honesty. And so our nervous system adapted. It became watchful, hyper-aware, sensitive to emotional danger long before your conscious mind could explain it. You entered rooms already scanning energy, reading faces, measuring tone. predicting emotional weather, not out of weakness, out of survival. This is what many people misunderstand about emotional sensitivity. It is not always softness. Sometimes it is vigilance wearing the mask of compassion. And then came disrespect, not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes disrespect hides inside interruptions, dismissal, emotional inconsistency, promises that dissolve, affection that feels conditional, moments when your worth depended upon how comfortable you kept others. And again, you stayed silent, because silence felt safer than conflict. You told yourself you were being mature. That understanding was more important than reaction. But somewhere beneath that calm surface, something inside you was learning another lesson. That your discomfort could be ignored, that your needs could wait, that preserving harmony mattered more than protecting your own spirit. And this is where self-abandonment becomes dangerous. Not dramatic, not visible, just quiet. Quiet enough to look like love. You overextended, overgave, overexplained. You offered empathy even when your own heart needed protection. And because sacrifice often receives approval, you mistook depletion for devotion. You called self-abandonment love, but your nervous system remembers every wound your mouth pretended never happened. It remembers the conversations that left your chest heavy, the apologies you accepted too quickly, the moments you felt unseen but forced yourself to stay understanding. Your body remembers what your survival instincts tried to minimize. Because buried emotions do not disappear. They settle inside your muscles, your sleep, your thoughts, your emotional reflexes. And over time, the darkness you fear. D was never truly darkness at all. It was grief, anger, truth. The forgotten voice inside you asking a painful question. How much of your kindness was actually survival? Because the soul grows tired of pretending. And eventually, what you bury begins asking to be felt. The truth may disturb you. Empaths do not only absorb pain, they store it. And when pain lives too long inside the soul, it changes shape. What you call compassion can slowly become exhaustion, resentment, and emotional fire. This is the part few people dare to discuss, because the world celebrates your empathy, but rarely asks what empathy costs you. You feel deeply. You notice what others overlook, the sadness behind confidence, the fear hidden beneath anger, the loneliness disguised as pride. And because your heart instinctively reaches towards suffering, you often become an emotional shelter, the listener, the healer, the safe place. But shelters carry storms too, and this is where danger begins, not in your kindness, but in your accumulation. Because emotions do not vanish simply because you understand them. Pain does not disappear because you are compassionate, and your nervous system cannot endlessly absorb emotional weight without consequence. So the pain stays, layer by layer, conversation by conversation, disappointment by disappointment. You tell yourself you are handling it, that you are simply sensitive, simply caring. But inside, something heavier is forming. Emotional exhaustion rarely arrives suddenly. It grows quietly, like water filling unseen cracks. At first, you barely notice. You become slightly more tired, slightly more withdrawn. Certain people drain you faster. Certain conversations leave your chest heavy, but you continue giving. Because giving became identity, and identities are difficult to question. Then something shifts. You begin feeling emotionally crowded, not by strangers, by accumulated energy, old wounds, unspoken anger, lingering grief. You may still smile, still care, still show compassion. But compassion without replenishment becomes survival. And survival changes people. This is why empaths sometimes shock others. Because people only know your softness. They never witness the pressure beneath it. They see patience, but not the restraint. They see calmness, but not the emotional labor maintaining it. And eventually, stored pain begins changing shape. This transformation is subtle. Compassion becomes fatigue. Patience becomes irritability. Understanding becomes silent resentment. You still care, but now the caring feels heavy. You still help, but something inside feels increasingly distant. And this confuses you, because your identity was built around kindness. So when exhaustion appears, you judge yourself. You ask, why am I becoming cold? Why am I losing patience? Why do I suddenly want distance? But perhaps you are not becoming cold. Perhaps you are. EL is becoming honest. Because emotional fire is not always rage. Sometimes it is accumulated pain demanding recognition. Pain that no longer wishes to be spiritualized, no longer wishes to be minimized, no longer wishes to remain silent for the comfort of others. And this is the hidden shadow many empaths fear. Not cruelty, not malice, but resentment. The resentment born when your compassion becomes one-sided, when you pour endlessly into people who never learn how to hold you, when your emotional generosity becomes expected instead of cherished, and resentment ignored does not disappear. It deepens, until one day you withdraw. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly. The messages become shorter, the emotional availability fades, the soul steps back, and people call this darkness. But what if they misunderstand? What if your emotional fire is not proof that something is wrong with you, but proof that something inside you has suffered too long without protection? Because empaths do not break overnight. They burn slowly. And every unhealed wound adds fuel to the flame. Be careful, not of strangers, not of enemies, but of the darkness created when your heart gives endlessly while your soul receives nothing. Because ignored pain does not disappear. It waits. And eventually, it speaks. This is the warning few people understand. You spend so much of your life protecting yourself from external harm that you forget to notice what is happening inside. You watch for betrayal. You prepare for disappointment. You guard your heart against careless people. But sometimes, the deepest danger is not outside you. It is the silent erosion happening beneath your own compassion, because endless giving carries a hidden cost, and your soul keeps the receipt. You tell yourself you are being loving, patient, selfless. But there is a difference between generosity and emotional depletion, and many empaths cross that line without realizing it. You answer messages while emotionally exhausted. You comfort people while secretly needing comfort yourself. You remain available long after your spirit begins asking for rest. And at first, this feels noble. You feel needed, valuable, important. But be careful. Need is not always connection. Sometimes, need becomes dependency. And dependency quietly teaches you to abandon your own emotional reality. So your heart keeps giving, even when your body feels tired, even when your mind feels crowded, even when your nervous system begins whispering that something is wrong. But whispers ignored do not remain whispers forever. This is what people misunderstand about pain. Pain is not impatient. It waits. It waits beneath distractions, beneath routines, beneath forced positivity. You may convince your conscious mind that everything is manageable, but your nervous system speaks another language, the language of tension, fatigue, emotional numbness, restlessness you cannot explain, a heaviness appearing in moments that should feel peaceful, because ignored pain does not vanish. It stores itself, and eventually, it begins asking to be heard. Perhaps you already know this feeling. You become irritated by things that once felt harmless. Small disappointments feel strangely heavy. Conversations drain you faster. Your tolerance shortens. Not because you suddenly became cruel, but because your emotional reserves have been quietly emptied. And this is where darkness forms, not as evil, not as hatred, but as accumulated neglect toward your own soul. A heart that only gives eventually forgets how to receive. And a soul that never receives begins starving in silence. Read that again. Starving in silence. This is why emotional explosions often confuse people. They say, "You changed. You became distant. You became cold." But they never witness the years of internal negotiation, the swallowed frustration, emotional labor, the exhaustion hidden beneath your kindness. Because emotional fire does not appear from nowhere. It grows where pain remains unheard. And eventually, it speaks. Sometimes through anger. Sometimes through withdrawal. Sometimes through sudden honesty that shocks even you. The truth escapes. The boundary finally appears. The soul refuses another performance. And perhaps this moment frightens you, because you spent so long identifying with gentleness that your own emotional intensity feels dangerous. But maybe danger is not the right word. Maybe truth feels dangerous to the version of you trained to survive through silence. So be careful, not of your sensitivity, not of your depth, but of the life created when your heart becomes everyone's refuge while your own soul lies homeless inside you. Because ignored pain always waits. And one day, it speaks with a voice impossible to silence. Your darkness was never the enemy. Your unconsciousness was. The moment you stop fearing what lives inside you, you stop being controlled by it. And that is where the real awakening begins. For most of your life, you believed healing meant becoming lighter, softer, more forgiving, more endlessly understanding. You thought spiritual growth meant removing every uncomfortable emotion from your heart. But that belief kept you trapped. Because healing was never the destruction of your darkness. It was the meeting of it. You feared your anger, so you buried it. You feared your grief, so you outran it. You feared disappointment, so you disguised it as acceptance. And slowly, you learned to mistrust parts of yourself that only wanted honesty. But hidden emotions do not become holy through suppression. They become louder, not to punish you, to reach you. Because what you call darkness is often misunderstood. It is not evil living inside you. It is pain waiting for language, truth waiting for courage, the wounded parts of your nervous system asking to be acknowledged instead of abandoned. And this changes everything. Because the moment you stop fighting yourself, something extraordinary happens. The inner war weakens. You stop performing peace and begin experiencing it. This is the awakening many people never reach. Not the performance of spirituality, not perfect calm, not endless positivity, but emotional honesty. The sacred moment when your soul says, I will no longer fear my own truth. And perhaps this truth surprises you. Perhaps you discover your kindness carried exhaustion, your patience carried grief, your loyalty carried unspoken loneliness. This realization may hurt, but pain seen clearly becomes wisdom. Pain denied becomes suffering. There is a difference. And now you stand before that difference. Because your darkness was never asking to control you. It was asking to be understood. The anger wanted boundaries. The grief wanted compassion. The exhaustion wanted rest. The resentment wanted honesty. Everything inside you carried a message. And the moment you listen, control begins to dissolve. This is why awareness changes people. Not because awareness removes pain, but because awareness removes blindness. You begin seeing your patterns, the overgiving, the self-abandonment, the emotional survival disguised as love. And once seen, these patterns lose their power. Because unconscious wounds govern your life only while they remain unseen. And perhaps this is the greatest shift of all. You stop apologizing for existing emotionally. You stop shrinking your needs to preserve false peace. You stop measuring your worth through sacrifice. And suddenly, your empathy changes. It becomes wiser, cleaner, stronger. No longer desperate to save. No longer afraid to protect itself. This is not the death of your softness. It is the birth of conscious compassion, the kind that includes you. So do not fear what lives inside you. Sit with it. Listen to it. Understand it. Because the soul you spent years hiding from may be the very soul waiting to set you free. And here, the awakening completes itself. You were never meant to become emotionless. You were never meant to become endlessly available. You were never meant to disappear inside other people's pain. You were meant to know yourself, fully, honestly, without fear. And the moment you stop running from your own inner world, you become something powerful. Not perfect, not untouchable, but awake. And an awakened soul can never again be imprisoned by the darkness it finally understands.